Welcome to Photo Relic's video about old logging trains. This photo, probably taken in 1910, shows the Wood and Iverson's Climax steam locomotive number 2 and its crew somewhere near Hobart. Wood and Iverson ran a sawmill and logging operation at Hobart, northeast of Auburn, Washington. This picture from 1900 shows a railway log dump. The train and railroad belonged to the Mosher and McDonald Logging Company in Washington State. Here's an old photograph from 1892, large fir logs on a rail flat car getting hauled to a mill in Washington State. Some nice old growth fir pictured here. This photograph from 1892 also showing a group of people beside the rail car. I'm betting that log is close to 9 feet in diameter. This picture taken in 1913 in Snohomish County shows some railroad construction workers. Lots of hard physical work back in those days. Pictured here in 1918 is a construction crew for the Copalis Lumber Company. This company was in business in Carlisle from 1914 to 1920. Its logging railroad was later absorbed into the Carlisle Lumber Company. This photo, taken around 1902 at Lake Forest Park, shows a locomotive and 2 flat cars loaded with logs on a pier. Between the 1870s and about 1910, loggers cleared the area north of Lake Washington. Here's a great photo from 1913 of an old Climax locomotive with flat cars loaded with logs. This picture was taken in Snohomish County. Notice the construction of that bridge, just big old fir logs. This picture from 1917 shows a Shay locomotive belonging to the E.B. Logging Company. This company ran from 1909 until 1927 when it sold its logging railroad to the Canyon Lumber Company. A 1922 photograph here of the railroad repair crew for the St. Paul and Tacoma Lumber Company. The St. Paul and Tacoma Lumber Company was in business until 1947, when it was bought out by the St. Regis Paper Company. Here's a 1917 photograph of a logging crew at Camp 5 for the English Lumber Company. English Lumber Company's Camp 5 was active from 1914 to 1920 and was located just east of Little Mountain on Carpenter Creek near Mount Vernon, Washington. A really nice 1924 photo here of the number 2 Climax locomotive at a logging camp was in Maple Valley, owned by the Stetson and Post Lumber Company, which was in business from 1922 to around 1930. Here's an old logging railway for you. This photo was taken in 1902 somewhere in California. Looks like those rails are just made out of wood. Notice the wooden brake pads on the wheels. I'll bet you it'd be pretty scary going downhill. Look at the size of this log. This photograph from 1924 shows a crew of the Clemens Logging Company. In 1936, the company was merged into the Weyerhaeuser Timber Company. Here's another photograph of the Climax number 2 locomotive of the Stetson and Post Lumber Company. This particular locomotive, serial number 1527, was a C-class locomotive built in 1919 for Augusta Wood Products of Virginia. Here's another picture from 1921 of the Winoochee Timber Company's number 1 locomotive. Here's a picture of the Puget Sound Mill and Timber Company's 2-truck Shay locomotive number 2. Picture is probably taken at the company's Camp 6 area in Clallam County. Here's a Coates Fordney Lumber Company Climax locomotive picture taken in 1920. This particular Climax locomotive carried a shop number of 768. Pictured here is a 1916 photo of the crew along with the owners of the Florence Logging Company in Sylvana, Washington. The locomotive is a 460 built by the Pennsylvania Railroad's locomotive shops. Here's a 1926 photo of a Clemens Logging Company Class C Climax locomotive. This particular Climax locomotive was built in December 1919. It weighed 80 tons. Nice photograph from 1924 of the crew of the Simpson Logging Company's Baldwin Locomotive No. 9 at Camp 1 in Mason County. According to the archive description, this 1941 photo is of a rail car of fir logs being unloaded at a log dump. The train belongs to the Long Bell Lumber Company of Cowlitz County, Washington. This is the North Bend Lumber Company's No. 4 Lima locomotive. Picture was taken in 1923 in Edgewick, Washington. Notice that log laying between the rail in front of that locomotive. Here's a 1922 photograph of the Puget Sound Mill and Timber Company 3-truck Shay Locomotive No. 7 crossing a trestle. This particular locomotive was built in March 1913 and was acquired by Puget Sound Mill and Timber Company in 1918. In this picture taken in 1922, we see a Lewis Mill and Timber Company 2-truck Shay Locomotive No. 1. You can also see the donkey engine on the very left side of this picture, as well as the 2 spar trees behind the loaded flat cars. Here's a 1917 photograph of a Stimson Logging Company 3-truck Climax locomotive. Stimson Lumber Company began in 1850 when Thomas Douglas Stimson and his partner felled their first tree. This picture from 1911 shows a small group of people standing beside Northern Coast's Timber Company's No. 102 locomotive. The locomotive is a 262 Baldwin. Northern Coast Timber Company was in business from 1907 to 1915. Here's a 1922 picture of Aloha Mill and Lumber Company's 2-truck Shay locomotive. The Aloha Mill and Lumber Company was based out of Aloha, Washington. This is a 1923 photo of a logging crew of the Saginaw Timber Company. The company constructed and operated a 40-mile logging railroad. In 1919, the company merged with the Leicester Logging Company. This photo from 1910 is titled Loggers with Big Logs. The logging company is the Coates Fordney Lumber Company. Sometimes you come across a picture and you have to just marvel at the construction and engineering. This is one of those pictures. The Cedar River Logging Trestle, 203 feet high and 843 feet long, built by Pacific States Lumber Company near Selleck, Washington. Here's a 1917 photo of a Heisler locomotive pulling flat cars of logs. This outfit was owned by the Emery and Nelson Company, which was headquartered in Napavine in Lewis County. This photo shows a Shay locomotive, the train crew, and flat cars full of logs. Shay engines were especially designed for steep places and tight curves. The photo was taken sometime between 1903 and 1905 at North Bend, Washington. Here's a nice photo of the Apex Timber Company Shay Locomotive No. 5 crossing a log jam trestle. This picture was taken in 1925. All aboard? This picture taken in 1925 shows a logging crew setting off to work in the rail crew car. These loggers worked for the Crown Willamette Paper Company, which later became known as the Crown Zellerbach Corporation. A 1923 photograph showing some loggers loading out a rail car for the National Lumber and Manufacturing Company. Here's a 1921 photograph of a rail construction crew working for the Wynooch Timber Company. They got that Bucyrus steam shovel digging out overburden to catch grade to lay track. Here's a 1922 photograph of Camp No. 3 of the Schaefer Brothers Logging Company. This company started in 1893 by 3 brothers logging with horses and oxen. When the company sold in 1955, they had 5 sawmills, over 100 miles of rail, 8 locomotives, 70 donkeys, and 325 logging cars, and approximately 3,000 employees. Well, I am going to end this video with this photo of Betsy, the Shay locomotive, and a short log train made up of the original disconnected log bunks brought from the Sokol mill around 1901. Now, if you enjoyed this video, I am sure you just might like this video. Be sure to give her a like, and I thank you for watching.